She fainted at work, and when doctors revealed her pregnancy, the Mafia boss asked, "Is it my child?" Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. Now, I need you to ask yourself something. Have you ever loved someone so dangerous that being with them could cost you everything? Have you ever looked into someone's eyes and seen both salvation and destruction staring back at you? Because that's exactly where Amara Collins found herself. And before this story ends, you'll understand why some loves are worth dying for. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 5,000 subscribers. But Elle believes stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. Add this CTA 10 minutes into the script, and this. Please subscribe to Kiana's love story, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. She shouldn't have called in sick, but the nausea wouldn't stop. The morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Sterling Pharmaceuticals' 42nd floor, casting long shadows across the polished marble lobby. Amara Collins stood before the elevator, her reflection caught in its gleaming steel doors. Caramel skin glowing despite the exhaustion she couldn't quite shake. Her natural curls pulled into a sleek, low bun that framed her elegant neck. At 28, she commanded attention without trying. Her tailored navy blazer hugging her curves while maintaining the professional authority she'd worked years to earn. But today, something felt different. "Focus, Amara," she told herself, pressing the button for the executive floor. "You've got the Morrison account presentation in 2 hours." The elevator hummed upward, and with each passing floor, her stomach twisted tighter. She'd blamed it on stress. The endless nights preparing proposals, the pressure of working directly under the most dangerous man in New York's underworld. But deep down, in a place she refused to acknowledge, she knew it was something else entirely. Something that started 2 months ago. Something that tasted like champagne and felt like fire. The elevator dinged softly as it reached the 38th floor. Amara stepped out, her heels clicking against the pristine white tiles as she made her way toward her corner office. A space she'd earned through sheer brilliance and unwavering dedication. The assistant's desk outside the Mafia Boss office wasn't just any position. It was the gateway to an empire built on secrets and blood. "Morning, Amara," called Jessica, one of the junior analysts, rushing past with an armload of files. "Ready for the big presentation?" Amara managed a smile, though it felt forced. "Always ready." "Liar," whispered a voice in her head. "You haven't been ready for anything since Chicago." Chicago. The pharmaceutical conference. The hotel bar. The way he'd looked at her when he thought no one was watching. The way his voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper when he'd asked if she wanted to get some air. The way the city lights had reflected in his dark eyes as he'd kissed her, like she was the only woman in the world. The way Kang Min-jun had made her forget every rule she'd ever made about mixing business with pleasure. Amara shook her head, forcing the memories away as she settled behind her desk. Her computer hummed to life, displaying a calendar packed with meetings, calls, and deadlines. This was her world. Controlled, organized, predictable. Not the chaos of emotions that threatened to surface every time she thought about that night. The intercom buzzed, startling her from her thoughts. "Miss Collins, could you bring the Morrison files to my office?" The voice was smooth, commanding, and achingly familiar. Even through the static of the speaker, it sent an unwelcome shiver down her spine. Kang Min-jun, CEO of Sterling Pharmaceuticals. 39 years old, 6 feet 3 inches of lean muscle and dangerous elegance, with dark hair that always looked perfectly styled and eyes that seemed to see straight through people's souls. He was brilliant, ruthless in business, and had built his empire from the ashes of his parents' execution at 19. What most people didn't know was that Sterling Pharmaceuticals was just the legitimate face of something far darker. Min Jun had inherited his father's position as head of one of New York's most powerful Korean crime syndicates, and he'd turned their operations into an untouchable empire. He was also the father of the child she didn't yet know she was carrying. "Of course, Mr. Kang," she replied, her voice steady despite the way her heart hammered against her ribs. Amara gathered the files, taking a moment to steady herself. She'd perfected the art of professional distance over the past 2 months, treating him exactly as she had before Chicago. Cool, efficient, untouchable. If he could pretend nothing had happened, so could she. Even if her body remembered every second of that night. She knocked once on his office door before entering. The space was a study in controlled power. Dark wood, leather furniture, and windows that offered a commanding view of Manhattan. Min Jun stood with his back to her, one hand pressed against the glass as he stared out at the city below. The morning light caught the sharp line of his jaw, and even in silhouette she could see the tension in his broad shoulders. "The Morrison files," she said, setting them on his desk with practiced precision. He turned slowly, and for just a moment, a heartbeat. Their eyes met. Dark, dangerous eyes clashing with warm brown. The air between them charged with an electricity that made her skin tingle and her breath catch. Then the mask slipped back into place. "Thank you." His voice was neutral, businesslike, as if he hadn't whispered her name like a prayer 2 months ago. As if he hadn't traced every curve of her body like he was memorizing a masterpiece. Amara nodded curtly and turned to leave, but his voice stopped her at the door. "Amara." The way he said her name, soft, almost uncertain, made her pause. "Are you feeling all right? You look pale." She stiffened, her hand on the door handle. "I'm fine, Mr. Kang." "Mr. Kang. Not Min Jun. Never Min Jun. Not anymore. It's just that you've seemed—" He paused, running a hand through his hair in a gesture she recognized as frustration. "Different lately." Different. If only he knew how different. If only she knew. "I'm perfectly fine," she repeated, her voice firmer now. "Will that be all?" For a moment he looked like he wanted to say something else. Something that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the way they'd fit together like missing pieces of the same puzzle. But then his jaw tightened, and he nodded. "That will be all." Amara escaped to her office, closing the door behind her and leaning against it as she tried to calm her racing heart. This was impossible. She couldn't keep working like this, pretending that the most incredible night of her life hadn't happened, pretending that she didn't dream about his hands on her skin, his lips against her throat. The way he'd made her feel alive in ways she'd never experienced. But she had to. Her career, her future. Everything she'd worked for depended on maintaining the professional boundary they'd shattered in Chicago. The morning passed in a blur of phone calls and emails, the nausea coming and going in waves that she stubbornly attributed to stress. By the time the Morrison presentation rolled around, she felt steadier, more in control. This was what she was good at: presenting data, managing expectations, being indispensable. The conference room filled with executives from both companies, the air thick with expensive cologne and the scent of fresh coffee. Amara took her usual position beside Min Jun's chair, her tablet ready with backup information and additional slides. "Ladies and gentlemen," Min Jun began, his voice commanding immediate attention. "Today, we're not just discussing a merger. We're talking about revolutionizing how the world approaches neurological treatment." As he spoke, Amara felt a familiar swell of pride. Say what you wanted about Kang Min-jun the man, but Kang Min-jun the CEO was extraordinary. Passionate, visionary, able to make people believe in possibilities they'd never imagined. The presentation was flawless. Data flowed seamlessly. Projections painted a picture of unprecedented success, and the Morrison executives nodded with increasing enthusiasm. Amara supplied additional information when needed, their professional partnership as smooth as silk. Then, midway through discussing market penetration in Europe, the room began to tilt. At first, she thought it was just the usual wave of nausea, but this was different. Deeper, more insistent. The voices around her became muffled, as if she were underwater. The carefully organized numbers on her tablet blurred together. "Miss Collins?" someone asked from far away. "Are you all right?" She tried to answer, tried to maintain her composure, but the room spun violently. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Minjun's face, twisted with worry and something that looked suspiciously like terror. The last thing she heard was his voice, raw with panic. "Amara!" And in that moment, as consciousness slipped away, she realized her carefully constructed world was about to change forever. The beeping of medical equipment was the first thing she heard when the world came back into focus. Amara's eyelids fluttered open to harsh fluorescent lights and the antiseptic smell of a hospital room. Her head throbbed with a dull ache, and for a moment she couldn't remember where she was or how she'd gotten there. Then it all came rushing back. The presentation, the spinning room, the darkness swallowing her whole. Thank God. The voice was rough with relief and utterly familiar. She turned her head to find Minjun sitting in the chair beside her bed, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his tie loosened, and his dark eyes rimmed with exhaustion. He looked like he'd aged years in the span of hours. "What? What happened?" Her voice came out as a whisper, her throat dry and scratchy. "You collapsed during the Morrison presentation." He leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together. "You've been unconscious for 3 hours." 3 hours? Amara. The way he said her name, raw, vulnerable, sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. She tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness forced her back against the pillows. "The presentation. Did we lose the deal?" Minjun stared at her incredulously. "The deal? Amara, you scared the hell out of everyone in that room. I thought—" He stopped himself, running a hand through his hair. "The deal doesn't matter. Nothing matters except making sure you're okay." The intensity in his voice, the way his mask had completely slipped away, made her chest tighten with emotions she'd been fighting for months. This wasn't her boss speaking. This was the man who'd held her until dawn in Chicago, who'd whispered her name like it was sacred, who'd made her believe in fairy tales for one perfect night. "I'm fine," she said, though they both knew it was a lie. "Just stress, probably. I haven't been sleeping well." Before he could respond, the door opened, and a woman in a white coat entered, her smile warm and professional. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, according to her badge, appeared to be in her 40s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. "Miss Collins, I'm so glad to see you're awake," Dr. Mitchell said, checking the chart in her hands. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck," Amara admitted. "But I'm okay. Just exhausted, I think." Dr. Mitchell's expression grew more serious as she approached the bed. "Actually, I need to discuss your test results with you. We ran some blood work when you came in, just to rule out any underlying conditions that might have caused the fainting episode." Amara felt Minjun tense beside her, though she kept her eyes on the doctor. "And?" "Well, the good news is that there's nothing seriously wrong with you." Dr. Mitchell smiled, but there was something in her expression that made Amara's stomach drop. "In fact, there's some very good news, depending on how you look at it." "What do you mean?" Dr. Mitchell glanced between her and Minjun, clearly assuming he was her husband or boyfriend. "Miss Collins, you're pregnant, approximately 8 weeks along based on your hormone levels." The words hit Amara like a physical blow. The room seemed to tilt again, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. 8 weeks. 8 weeks would put the conception right around Chicago. She could feel Minjun's eyes boring into her, could practically hear the wheels turning in his head as he did the same math she was doing. 8 weeks ago, she'd been in his hotel room, their bodies moving together in perfect rhythm, lost in a passion that had felt like destiny. 8 weeks. Minjun's voice was strained, carefully controlled. Dr. Mitchell nodded cheerfully, oblivious to the tension crackling between them. Yes, which would put conception around mid-March. The fainting episode was likely due to hormonal changes and possibly some morning sickness. It's very common in the first trimester. Amara stared at the ceiling, her mind reeling. Pregnant. She was pregnant with Kang Min-jun's baby, and she hadn't even known. How could she not have known? The signs had been there. The nausea, the exhaustion, the way her body had felt different lately. But she'd been so focused on maintaining professional distance, on pretending Chicago never happened, that she'd ignored every signal her body had been sending. "I'll give you two some time to process this news," Dr. Mitchell said, apparently mistaking their shocked silence for overwhelmed joy. "I'll be back in a bit to discuss next steps and discharge paperwork. Congratulations." The moment the door closed behind her, the silence in the room became deafening. Amara couldn't look at Min-jun. She could feel his presence like a physical weight, could hear his breathing change as he processed what they had just learned. When he finally spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. 8 weeks. It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway, still staring at the ceiling tiles as if they held the answers to questions she wasn't ready to ask. "The conference in Chicago was 8 weeks ago." Another nod. Her throat felt too tight to speak. "Amara." His voice was softer now, almost gentle. "Look at me." She couldn't. If she looked at him, if she saw the questions in his eyes, she'd fall apart completely. And Amara Collins didn't fall apart. She was strong, controlled, independent. She didn't get accidentally pregnant by her boss after a one-night stand that was supposed to mean nothing. "Amara, please." The please broke her. She turned her head slowly, meeting his gaze for the first time since the doctor's revelation. What she saw there wasn't anger or accusation. It was raw vulnerability, hope, and something that looked suspiciously like wonder. "Is it mine?" The question came out as barely a whisper, but it might as well have been shouted for the impact it had. The simple question hung between them like a live wire. She could lie. She could tell him she'd been seeing someone else, that there was doubt about paternity. And it would be easier that way, cleaner. She could handle this alone, the way she'd handled everything else in her life. But looking into his eyes, seeing the careful hope he was trying to hide, she couldn't do it. "Yes." The word came out broken, barely audible. "Yes, it's yours." The effect was immediate. Min-jun's carefully maintained composure cracked completely. He leaned back in his chair, running both hands through his hair as he tried to process the magnitude of what she'd just confirmed. When he looked at her again, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice was rough with emotion. "When you started feeling sick? When you suspected? Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I didn't know." The words exploded out of her, months of suppressed emotions finally breaking free. "I didn't know, Min-jun. I thought it was stress or exhaustion or I don't know what I thought, but I didn't think this." She gestured helplessly at her stomach, at the tiny life growing inside her that she'd been completely unaware of until 5 minutes ago. "And even if I had known," she continued, her voice shaking, "what was I supposed to say? Hey, Mr. Kang, remember that night we pretended never happened? Well, surprise, you're going to be a daddy." Min-jun flinched at her words, at the pain and sarcasm lacing her voice. "We need to talk about that night." "No, we don't." Amara turned away again, focusing on the window where afternoon sunlight filtered through Venetian blinds. "We agreed it was a mistake. We agreed to pretend it never happened. I never agreed to that. His voice was quiet but firm. You decided that. You made that choice for both of us. Because it was the right choice. She whirled back to face him, her eyes flashing with a mixture of anger and hurt. You're my boss, Minjun. You're the CEO of the company I work for. What we did was unprofessional and stupid and the most real thing I've felt in years. The words stopped her cold. Minjun was standing now, moving closer to her bed with the careful grace of a predator approaching skittish prey. Do you think it was easy for me? He asked, his voice low and intense. Pretending I didn't know how you taste, how you sound when you whisper my name, how perfectly you fit in my arms? Do you think I enjoyed going back to calling you Miss Collins when all I wanted was to kiss you senseless every time you walked into my office? Amara's breath hitched at his words, at the raw honesty in his voice. This was the Minjun she remembered from Chicago. Passionate, vulnerable, utterly human beneath his executive armor. Minjun, she whispered, but he wasn't finished. I've been going crazy for 2 months, Amara. Crazy wondering if I imagined how incredible that night was, if I made up the connection between us. And now, he gestured helplessly, now there's a baby. Our baby. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and terror in equal measure. Amara felt tears she hadn't realized she was crying slip down her cheeks. I'm scared, she whispered, the admission costing her everything. Amara Collins didn't admit fear. She faced challenges head-on, conquered them through sheer force of will. But this was bigger than anything she'd ever faced. In an instant, Minjun was beside her, his large hands cradling her face with infinite gentleness. I'm scared too, he admitted, his thumbs brushing away her tears. But we're in this together now. Whether you like it or not, whether it's complicated or messy or completely insane, we're in this together. For a moment, she let herself lean into his touch. Let herself remember what it felt like to not carry the weight of the world alone. But then reality crashed back, and she pulled away. Together? She laughed bitterly. Minjun, I work for you. The press would have a field day if they found out the powerful CEO got his assistant pregnant. My career would be over before it started. Then we'll figure it out, he said firmly. We'll find a way to make it work. How? She demanded. How do we make this work when everything about it is impossible? Minjun was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face. When he spoke again, his voice was steady, certain. We start with the truth, he said. The truth that what happened in Chicago wasn't a mistake. The truth that I haven't been able to stop thinking about you for 2 months. The truth that the idea of you carrying my child terrifies and thrills me in equal measure. He reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. And the truth that I want this, Amara. I want you, and I want our baby. And I want to figure out how to make this impossible situation work. Amara stared at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, the hope he wasn't bothering to hide anymore. Part of her wanted to believe him, wanted to lean into the fantasy that they could somehow make this work. But the practical part of her, the part that had fought for everything she'd achieved, knew better. It's not that simple, she whispered. It is that simple, he countered. It's everything else that's complicated. Before she could respond, Dr. Mitchell knocked and entered again, her professional smile firmly in place. How are we doing in here? Ready to discuss next steps? Amara and Minjun sprang apart, the spell of intimacy broken by the return to reality. But as the doctor began discussing prenatal vitamins and follow-up appointments, Amara couldn't stop thinking about Minjun's words. It is that simple. It's everything else that's complicated. And as Dr. Mitchell continued talking, as Minjun listened intently to every instruction about caring for her and their unborn child, Amara realized that the most terrifying thing wasn't the pregnancy itself. It was how much she wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to make the impossible work. But what she didn't know yet was that Minjun's world was far more dangerous than she'd ever imagined, and loving him would require more courage than she'd ever needed before. The discharge papers were signed. Reality waited outside the hospital doors, and both of their lives had just changed forever. The hospital lobby felt like stepping into another universe, one where their secret was no longer just theirs. The late afternoon sun painted Manhattan in shades of gold and amber as Amara and Minjun stepped through the automatic doors of Mount Sinai Hospital. The real world rushed to meet them. Car horns, chattering pedestrians, the relentless pulse of a city that never stopped moving. After the sterile quiet of the hospital room, it felt overwhelming. Amara clutched the discharge papers in one hand, her purse in the other, trying to process the fact that her entire life had changed in the span of a few hours. Pregnant. She was pregnant with Kang Minjun's baby, and somehow she still couldn't quite believe it was real. "My driver is waiting," Minjun said softly, his hand hovering near the small of her back, not quite touching, but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his palm. "I can take a cab," she replied automatically, the professional distance she'd perfected slipping back into place like armor. Old habits died hard, even when the world had been turned upside down. Minjun stopped walking, turning to face her on the busy sidewalk. People flowed around them like water around stones, but he seemed completely oblivious to the crowd. His dark eyes were intense, focused entirely on her. "Amara, you just found out you're carrying my child. You're not taking a cab." His voice was gentle but firm, the tone he used in board meetings when he'd made a decision and wouldn't be swayed. "Please, let me take care of you." The word please did something to her resolve, the same way it had in the hospital room. Kang Minjun didn't beg. He commanded, he decided, he took charge. But with her, he asked. With her, he was different. She nodded reluctantly, and his shoulders visibly relaxed. The ride to her apartment in Brooklyn Heights was tense with unspoken words. Minjun's sleek black sedan felt impossibly intimate after the clinical environment of the hospital. The leather seats, the soft classical music, the way he kept glancing at her as if she might disappear. It all felt too much like the car ride back from dinner in Chicago, when the air between them had crackled with possibility and desire. "The Morrison deal," Amara said suddenly, needing to fill the silence with something safe and familiar. "Did we lose it?" Minjun looked at her incredulously. "You're pregnant with my child, and you're worried about the Morrison deal?" "I'm worried about my job," she corrected, though even as she said it, she knew it was only partly true. Work had always been her anchor, her source of identity and control. Without it, she felt adrift. "Your job is secure, Amara. More than secure." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes serious. "But we need to discuss what happens next, how we handle this at the office, what we tell people." "We don't tell people anything," she said quickly. "This is private, personal. It doesn't affect our work." "Doesn't affect our work?" Minjun's voice rose slightly. "Amara, you're having my baby. How does that not affect everything?" She turned to look out the window, watching Brooklyn's tree-lined streets blur past. "Because I can't let it. I've worked too hard to get where I am to let this derail my career." The silence that followed was heavy with hurt and frustration. When Minjun spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. "Is that what this is to you? A derailment?" The quiet pain in his voice made her chest tighten, but she forced herself not to look at him. I don't know what this is yet. I need time to think." The car pulled up outside her building, a converted brownstone with large windows and a small garden courtyard. It was charming without being ostentatious, the kind of place a successful executive assistant could afford without attracting unwanted attention. "I'll walk you up," Minjun said, already moving to open his door. That's not necessary. It's necessary to me. There was something in his tone that brooked no argument, a gentleness wrapped in steel that reminded her why he'd been so successful in business and why he was so dangerous in his other life. He got what he wanted, but he made you want to give it to him. They rode the elevator to the fourth floor in silence, the confined space making her hyper-aware of everything about him. The subtle scent of his cologne, the way his suit jacket stretched across his broad shoulders, the careful distance he maintained even though every cell in her body seemed to be pulling toward him. At her door, Amara fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking slightly. Whether from the day's events or Minjun's proximity, she couldn't tell. "Here," he said softly, covering her hands with his to steady them. The touch sent electricity shooting up her arm, and she had to suppress a shiver. "Let me." He took the keys gently, his fingers brushing hers as he unlocked the door. For a moment they stood frozen in the hallway, his hands still covering hers, their faces inches apart. She could see the depths of darkness in his eyes, could feel his breath warm against her skin. "Amara," he whispered, and she knew that if she let him say whatever was in his eyes, everything would change, again. She stepped back quickly, breaking the spell. "Thank you for the ride." But instead of leaving, Minjun followed her inside, closing the door behind him. Her apartment was exactly what he'd expected. Elegant but comfortable, with warm colors and carefully chosen artwork. Books everywhere, a small piano in one corner, fresh flowers on the coffee table. It was quintessentially her. Beautiful, sophisticated, and completely genuine. "Nice place," he said, but his attention wasn't on the decor, it was on her. On the way, she was standing with her arms wrapped around herself like a shield. "Minjun, you can't be here." Her voice was shaky, and they both knew it had nothing to do with propriety and everything to do with the way he was looking at her. "Why not?" "Because," she gestured helplessly, "because we're not. We're not anything. We work together. That's all." "That's all?" He stepped closer, and she backed up until she hit the wall beside her bookshelf. He braced one hand against the wall next to her head, not trapping her, but close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "So what happened in Chicago was nothing." "It was a mistake," she whispered, but the words lacked conviction. "Look me in the eyes and tell me it was a mistake." His voice was low, rough with emotion. "Look me in the eyes and tell me you didn't feel what I felt that night." She tried. God help her. She tried to lie, to maintain the professional distance that had kept her safe for 2 months. But looking into his eyes, seeing the vulnerability and hope and desperate longing there, she couldn't do it. "It doesn't matter what I felt," she said instead. "It can't happen again." "Why not?" "Because you're my boss. Because I work for you. Because if anyone finds out, then I'll quit." The words hit her like a physical blow. She stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "What?" "I'll quit Sterling Pharmaceuticals. I'll sell my shares, step down from the board. Whatever it takes." His other hand came up to cradle her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "I won't let my position stand between us." "You can't do that," she breathed. "Sterling is your life. You built it from nothing." "I built it because I had nothing else to live for," he said simply. "But now I do. Now I have you, and our baby, and the possibility of something I never thought I could have." "What?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "A family." The raw honesty in his voice, the way his mask had completely fallen away, made her knees weak. This wasn't the controlled CEO speaking. This was just Minjun, the man who'd held her in the dark hours before dawn, who'd told her about losing his parents, who'd made her feel less alone in the world than she ever had before. "You don't know what you're saying," she said, but her protest was weak. "You don't know anything about me, about my life." I know you take your coffee black, but add sugar when you think no one's looking, he said softly. I know you hum when you're concentrating, and you bite your lower lip when you're thinking hard about something. I know you're brilliant and driven and stronger than anyone I've ever met. He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. I know you grew up in foster care but put yourself through college and graduate school. I know you speak 3 languages and play piano and have nightmares sometimes that make you afraid to sleep. With each word, her defenses crumbled a little more. He did know her somehow. In the months they'd worked together and the single night they'd shared, he'd seen her in ways that most people never did. I know, he continued, his voice growing softer, that you're terrified of needing anyone, because everyone you've ever needed has let you down. But I'm not going anywhere, Amara, not this time. Tears she didn't remember starting to cry slipped down her cheeks. Minjun. Let me in, he whispered, his forehead resting against hers. Let me be what you need. Let us try. For a moment, suspended in the golden afternoon light filtering through her windows, she let herself imagine it. Letting down her guard, letting him in, building something real and lasting with this impossible man who saw straight through her carefully constructed walls. Then her phone rang. The spell shattered. Amara ducked under his arm, moving to grab her phone from her purse. The caller ID made her heart sink. Jessica Chen, Sterling Pharmaceuticals. I have to take this, she said, already answering. Hello? Amara, thank God you're okay. Jessica's voice was bright with relief. Everyone's been talking about what happened in the presentation. Are you all right? What did the doctor say? Amara's eyes met Minjun's across the room. His expression was carefully neutral, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, when the way his hands had clenched into fists at his sides. I'm fine, she said into the phone, forcing her voice to stay steady. Just exhaustion. I'll be back in the office tomorrow. Tomorrow? Are you sure you should? I'm sure. Just a little rest and I'll be good as new. After she hung up, the silence stretched between them like a chasm. Minjun's face had shuddered again, the vulnerable man from moments before replaced by the controlled executive she knew so well. Back to the office tomorrow, he said quietly. Back to pretending nothing happened. Minjun, no. I get it. He straightened his tie, his movements sharp and precise. You've made your position clear. We work together. That's all. It's not that simple. It is exactly that simple, Amara. You're either willing to try or you're not. You either trust me or you don't. He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. I'll have my lawyer draw up papers regarding the baby. Financial support, medical expenses, whatever you need. But if you want to keep pretending that what's between us doesn't exist. He turned to look at her one last time, and the pain in his eyes nearly brought her to her knees. Then I'll pretend too. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and Amara was alone. She sank onto her couch, one hand unconsciously moving to her still flat stomach. Outside, the sounds of Brooklyn evening life filtered through her windows. Children playing, neighbors chatting, the distant hum of traffic. Normal sounds of normal life. But nothing about her life was normal anymore. And as she sat in her carefully ordered apartment, surrounded by the life she'd built through determination and independence, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. The golden light faded to evening shadows, and with it, the possibility of something beautiful slipped further away. Tomorrow they'll return to the office. Tomorrow they'll pretend nothing has changed. But some secrets are too big to hide, and some connections are too powerful to deny. And neither of them knew yet just how dangerous their connection would become. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 5,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. Walking into Sterling Pharmaceuticals felt like stepping into a minefield where every glance could be explosive. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble lobby as Amara stepped through the revolving doors of Sterling Pharmaceuticals. She'd spent an hour perfecting her makeup to hide the exhaustion etched in every line of her face. Choosing her most professional blazer, navy blue with sharp shoulders that made her feel armored and in control. But beneath the carefully constructed exterior, her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird. Pregnant. The word echoed in her mind with every click of her heels against the polished floor. She was carrying Kang Min-jun's baby, and today she had to pretend that nothing had changed. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt endless. She deliberately arrived early, hoping to settle into her routine before facing the inevitable questions about yesterday's incident. But as the doors slid open on the 38th floor, she realized her plan had backfired. Min-jun stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, visible through the glass walls, his silhouette dark against the Manhattan skyline. Even from across the reception area, she could see the tension in his broad shoulders, the way he held himself with military precision. He was already here, already working, already pretending. Their eyes met through the glass for one electric moment. Time seemed to suspend itself. The bustling office faded away, leaving only the memory of his hands cradling her face, his voice rough with emotion as he'd offered to give up everything for her. Then he looked away, turning back to his computer as if she were nothing more than another employee arriving for work. The dismissal hit her like a slap, even though she'd asked for exactly this: professional distance, pretending, the careful dance they'd perfected over the past 2 months, now with the added weight of a secret that felt like it might crush them both. Amara! Jessica's bright voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. You look so much better. I was worried sick yesterday. Just needed some rest, Amara replied, forcing a smile as she settled behind her desk. The familiar routine felt surreal. Checking emails, reviewing Min-jun's schedule, preparing for the day ahead as if her entire world hadn't shifted on its axis. The Morrison people called this morning, Jessica continued, perching on the edge of Amara's desk. They want to reschedule the presentation for Thursday. Apparently, Mr. Kang called them personally yesterday to apologize for the interruption. Of course he had. Even in crisis, even when his world was imploding, Min-jun took care of business. It was one of the things No, she couldn't let her mind go there. Not here, not now. I'll add it to his calendar, she said briskly. The morning passed in a blur of phone calls and meetings, each interaction feeling slightly unreal. Amara threw herself into work with fierce determination, using the familiar tasks as armor against the chaos in her mind. But every time Min-jun's voice carried from his office, every time she glimpsed him through the glass walls, her concentration shattered. At 11:30, her computer chimed with a calendar reminder. Weekly strategy meeting, conference room A. Her stomach dropped. The weekly strategy meeting. 2 hours in a conference room with Min-jun and the senior staff, sitting across from him, taking notes, pretending that less than 24 hours ago, he'd offered to quit everything for her. She gathered her files with hands that trembled slightly, telling herself it was low blood sugar, pregnancy symptoms, anything but the effect of knowing she'd be in the same room as the father of her child, breathing the same air, watching his mouth move as he spoke, and remembering how those lips had felt against her skin. The conference room was already half full when she arrived. Amara took her usual seat, second chair from the wall, perfect angle to take notes and observe without being conspicuous. She'd chosen this spot months ago for its strategic advantages. Now it felt like torture. Min-jun entered exactly on time, his presence immediately commanding the room's attention. He wore a charcoal suit that made his eyes look like dark storms, his hair perfectly styled despite the fact that she'd seen him run his hands through it in frustration just yesterday. He looked every inch the powerful CEO, controlled, confident, completely unaffected. Only Amara caught the slight tightness around his eyes, the careful way he avoided looking in her direction. "Let's begin," he said, his voice crisp and professional. "Marketing wants to discuss the Q3 campaign strategy for the neurological division." The meeting proceeded normally. Presentations, discussions, the usual corporate choreography that Amara could navigate in her sleep. She took notes with mechanical precision, her handwriting neat and controlled, even as her pulse raced every time Minjun spoke. Then, 40 minutes in, disaster struck in the most mundane way possible. Amara reached for her water glass at the exact moment Minjun leaned forward to examine a document. Their fingers brushed, barely a whisper of contact, but the effect was electric. The touch sent sparks shooting up her arm, and she jerked back so quickly that she knocked over her water glass. Ice water spread across the polished conference table, soaking into reports and pooling around laptops. The room erupted in concerned chatter as people grabbed papers and napkins, but all Amara could focus on was the way Minjun had gone completely still. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, grabbing napkins to clean up the mess. "I don't know what—" "It's fine," Minjun said, but his voice was strained. He handed her his handkerchief, monogrammed linen that smelled faintly of his cologne, and their fingers brushed again as she took it. This time, neither of them pulled away immediately. The touch lasted perhaps 3 seconds, an eternity in a room full of colleagues. When they finally broke contact, the air between them crackled with enough electricity to power half of Manhattan. "Perhaps we should take a short break," announced Patricia Wells, the head of marketing, glancing between them with barely concealed curiosity. As the room emptied, Amara found herself alone with Minjun and a puddle of water that felt like a metaphor for how thoroughly she was drowning. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly, moving to help her gather the soggy papers. "I'm fine," she said quickly, not looking at him. "Just clumsy." "Amara." Her name was a whisper, spoken so softly that only she could hear it. "Look at me." She made the mistake of lifting her eyes to his, and what she saw there nearly undid her completely. Concern, longing, and something that looked suspiciously like the same desperate need that was clawing at her insides. "This isn't working," he said, his voice barely audible. "It has to work," she whispered back. "Does it?" He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of warmth in his dark eyes. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like we're both miserable." Before she could respond, the conference room door opened and Patricia Wells returned, followed by the rest of the team. Minjun stepped back smoothly, his professional mask sliding into place so seamlessly that Amara almost wondered if she'd imagined the moment of vulnerability. But she hadn't imagined it. The air still hummed with tension, and she could feel curious glances from their colleagues as the meeting resumed. The rest of the session passed without incident, but Amara barely absorbed a word. Her focus was entirely consumed by the man sitting across from her. The careful way he held himself, the unconscious gestures he made when he was thinking deeply, the way his voice changed slightly when he addressed her directly. When the meeting finally ended, Amara was the first to escape, practically fleeing to the safety of her office. But even there, surrounded by the familiar chaos of ringing phones and endless emails, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was coming apart at the seams. The afternoon brought a new form of torture: dictation. Minjun called her into his office at 3 o'clock, his voice professionally neutral over the intercom. "I need to dictate some correspondence." It was routine, something they'd done hundreds of times over the past year. Amara would sit in the chair across from his desk, tablet ready, while he paced and dictated letters, memos, and reports. It was efficient, productive, and usually completely impersonal. Today, it felt like intimate torture. The moment she stepped into his office, the air grew thick with unspoken words. Minjun stood behind his desk, his hands braced against the leather surface, looking like a man barely holding himself together. "Close the door," he said, without looking up. The soft click of the door seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. Amara moved to her usual chair, tablet ready, trying to ignore the way her hands were shaking. "Ready when you are," she said, proud of how steady her voice sounded. Min Jun began to pace, his movements fluid and controlled, but Amara could see the tension coiled in every line of his body. He dictated a memo about quarterly projections, his voice crisp and professional, while she typed with mechanical precision. But as he moved around the office, the formal distance began to feel increasingly artificial. This was the man who'd held her through the night in Chicago, who'd whispered her name like a prayer, who'd offered to give up everything for her just yesterday. Now they were pretending to be nothing more than boss and assistant, and the pretense was suffocating them both. "Which brings us to the matter of long-term strategic planning," Min Jun was saying, but his voice had grown rougher, less controlled. "We need to consider the implications of unexpected developments that might affect our corporate structure." Amara's fingers stilled on the tablet. Was he talking about quarterly projections, or about them? "Should I note that as a separate agenda item?" she asked carefully. Min Jun stopped pacing, turning to face her fully for the first time since she'd entered the office. "What do you think, Miss Collins? How should we handle unexpected complications that might disrupt our established procedures?" The question hung between them, loaded with double meaning. They were talking about memos and strategic planning, but they might as well have been discussing the baby growing inside her, the impossible situation they found themselves in. "I think," Amara said slowly, "that sometimes unexpected complications can lead to better outcomes if handled properly." "And what constitutes proper handling?" His voice was soft now, intense, his dark eyes fixed on her face. "Honesty," she whispered, "clear communication, being willing to adapt when circumstances change." They stared at each other across the expanse of his office, the professional pretense wearing thinner with every shared breath. The late afternoon sun slanted through his windows, casting them both in golden light, and for a moment it felt like the most natural thing in the world to close the distance between them. Then Min Jun's phone rang, shattering the spell. He answered curtly, his attention immediately claimed by what was apparently an urgent call from the board of directors. Amara used the interruption to escape, gathering her things and slipping out of his office before the call ended. Back at her desk, she tried to focus on the routine tasks that usually grounded her, but her mind kept replaying the charged conversation, the way he'd looked at her, the undercurrent of longing that had threaded through even their most professional exchanges. As the office began to empty for the evening, Amara found herself working later than usual, unable to face the thought of going home to her empty apartment where she'd have nothing to distract her from the chaos in her mind. She was so absorbed in reviewing contracts that she didn't notice Min Jun approaching her desk until his shadow fell across her papers. "It's past 7, he said quietly. "You should go home." "I'm almost finished," she replied without looking up, hyper-aware of his presence beside her desk. "Amara." The way he said her name made her look up despite herself. "You need to eat dinner. You need to rest. You're—" He paused, glancing around to make sure they were alone before continuing in a lower voice. "You're carrying my child. I can't stand by and watch you exhaust yourself." The genuine concern in his voice, the careful way he acknowledged their situation while maintaining the necessary discretion, made her chest tighten with emotions she couldn't name. "I can take care of myself," she said, but the protest lacked conviction. "I know you can," he replied gently, "but you don't have to. Not anymore." The simple statement hung between them like a lifeline, an offer of support, of partnership, of something she'd never allowed herself to want. For a moment, in the quiet emptiness of the evening office, surrounded by the detritus of corporate life, she let herself imagine accepting that offer, letting him take care of her. building something real and lasting despite all the complications. Then reality crashed back, and she began gathering her things with brisk efficiency. "I should go," she said. "Long day tomorrow." Minjun nodded, stepping back to give her space, but his eyes never left her face. "Amara," he said as she reached the elevator, "this isn't over." It wasn't a threat or a promise, just a simple statement of fact that made her pulse race and her heart ache in equal measure. The elevator doors closed between them, but the truth remained. Some things were too powerful to hide, even behind the thickest walls of professional pretense. Another day of pretending. Another night of wanting what seemed impossible. But in the morning, they'll have to face each other again, and the mask is getting harder to maintain. Some masks are meant to crack, and when they do, everything beautiful and terrifying underneath comes rushing out. But what neither of them knew yet was that their carefully maintained facade was about to be shattered by forces far more dangerous than office gossip. Forces that would make their professional complications seem trivial in comparison. Forces from Minjun's other world, the one he'd been so careful to keep separate from Amara. The world of blood, violence, and power that he'd inherited at 19. The world that was about to come crashing into their lives in the most devastating way possible. 3 days after their tense office encounters, Amara sat in her apartment trying to focus on the work she'd brought home. But her mind kept drifting to Minjun, to the baby growing inside her, to the impossible situation they'd created. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You need to know the truth about Kang Minjun. Meet me at the Starbucks on 5th and 42nd tomorrow at noon. Come alone. This is about your safety." Amara stared at the message, her heart pounding. Who would text her this? What truth? And why did they care about her safety? She should ignore it. She should delete it and pretend she never saw it. But something in her gut told her this was important, that whatever information this person had could change everything. The next day, she found herself sitting in the crowded Starbucks at exactly noon, nursing a decaf latte and watching the door with growing anxiety. A woman in her 50s approached her table, well-dressed with sharp eyes and an air of authority that suggested law enforcement or something similar. "Miss Collins?" the woman asked, sliding into the seat across from her without waiting for an invitation. "My name is Detective Sarah Park. I work in organized crime with the NYPD." Amara's blood ran cold. Organized crime? "I've been investigating Kang Minjun for the past 3 years," Detective Park said quietly, sliding a folder across the table. "And I think you deserve to know exactly who you're working for." With trembling hands, Amara opened the folder. Inside were photographs, surveillance reports, documented connections to known criminals. But what made her stomach drop was a series of photos showing Minjun at what appeared to be high-level meetings with dangerous-looking men. "Sterling Pharmaceuticals is a legitimate business," Detective Park explained, "but it's also the perfect cover for one of the most powerful Korean crime syndicates operating in New York. Money laundering, illegal pharmaceutical distribution, protection rackets. Kang Min-jun inherited the operation from his father, who was executed by a rival gang 20 years ago." Amara felt like she couldn't breathe. "That's impossible. Min-jun is a businessman?" Detective Park's smile was sad. "He is. He's also extremely good at compartmentalizing. Most people who work at Sterling have no idea about his other life. But Miss Collins, I've been watching you. I've seen how he looks at you. And I'm concerned about your safety." "Why?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "Because women who get close to men like Kang Min-jun become targets. Leverage. Ways for rival organizations to get to him." She leaned forward, her expression intense. "And if you're pregnant with his child, as I suspect you might be based on your recent hospital visit, you're in more danger than you can possibly imagine." Amara's hand instinctively moved to her stomach. "How do you—" "We have eyes everywhere, Miss Collins. And so do his enemies. Detective Park pulled out another photo. This one showing Amara leaving the hospital with Minjun 3 days ago. This photo was taken by a member of the Jade Dragon Triad, one of Kang's biggest rivals. They know about you. And they know about the baby. The world seemed to tilt. Everything she thought she knew about Minjun, about her life, about their situation, was crashing down around her. What do they want? She asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. What they always want. Power. Territory. And the best way to hurt Kang Minjun is to hurt the people he cares about. Detective Park's expression softened slightly. I'm telling you this because you seem like a good person who got caught up in something you didn't understand. My advice? Get as far away from him as possible. We can put you in protective custody, help you relocate, make sure you and your baby are safe. Amara sat in stunned silence, her mind reeling. Minjun was a crime boss. Everything about Sterling, about their relationship, about the life she thought they might build together, was built on a foundation of lies and violence. I need to think, she said finally, gathering the folder with shaking hands. Don't think too long, Detective Park warned. The Jade Dragons don't have patience, and neither do the other organizations circling Kang's territory. You're a target now, Miss Collins. The only question is whether you'll let us protect you, or whether you'll trust a man who's been lying to you since the day you met. Amara left the coffee shop in a daze, the folder clutched against her chest like a shield. She walked for hours through Manhattan, trying to process what she'd learned, trying to reconcile the man she thought she knew with the criminal mastermind in those surveillance photos. By the time she returned to her apartment, she'd made a decision. She needed to confront him. And she needed to hear the truth from his own lips, not from a police detective with her own agenda. She texted him from her personal phone, the number he'd given her at the hospital. We need to talk. Tonight. My place. It's important. His response came immediately. I'll be there at 8. The hours until he arrived felt like an eternity. Amara paced her apartment. The folder spread across her coffee table like evidence at a trial. Because that's what this was, wasn't it? A trial. She would present the evidence, and he would either confirm or deny, and their entire future would hinge on what happened next. When the knock came at exactly 8 o'clock, she took a deep breath and opened the door. Minjun stood in her doorway, still in his business attire but with his tie loosened and his jacket gone. He looked tired and concerned, and when his eyes met hers, she saw genuine worry there. What's wrong? He asked immediately, stepping inside. Is it the baby? Are you? Who are you? The question stopped him cold. Really, Minjun? Who are you? Something flickered across his face, too quick to read, but when he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. I don't understand. Don't you? Amara moved to the coffee table and picked up one of the surveillance photos. Then explain this. Explain why the NYPD has been investigating you for 3 years. Explain why Detective Sarah Park thinks I'm in danger just from being near you. Minjun's expression went completely blank, but she could see the tension coiling in his body like a spring about to snap. Sarah Park approached you? She showed me everything. The money laundering, the connections to organized crime. The fact that Sterling Pharmaceuticals is just a front for a criminal empire. Amara's voice was shaking now, with anger or fear, or both. She told me that your father was executed by a rival gang. She told me that you inherited his position. She told me that I'm a target now, that our baby is a target, because of who you really are. The silence that followed was deafening. Minjun stood perfectly still, his dark eyes fixed on her face, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something that looked like genuine fear in his expression. I was going to tell you, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. When? The word came out like a whip crack. When were you going to tell me that everything about your life is a lie, that loving you could get me killed? It's not a lie. He stepped toward her, but she backed away. Amara, please. Let me explain. Then explain. She threw the photo at him, and he caught it reflexively. Explain how you thought you could build a family with me while running a criminal organization. Explain how you thought you could keep me safe when you have enemies who would use me and our child as leverage against you. Explain how any of this was ever going to work. I never wanted this life. The words exploded out of him, raw and desperate. I was 19 years old when they killed my parents. 19, Amara. I came home from college and found them executed in our living room, and the organization, my father's lieutenants, they told me I had two choices: take over or die. He ran both hands through his hair, his carefully controlled facade cracking completely. So I took over. And I've spent 20 years trying to make something legitimate out of the empire my father built. Sterling Pharmaceuticals isn't just a front, it's real. The drugs we develop save lives. The research we fund changes the world. I've been slowly shifting our operations away from the criminal activities, trying to build something clean. But you're still involved? Amara said, her voice breaking. You're still part of that world. Yes. He met her eyes, and the honesty there was brutal. I can't just walk away. There are obligations, territories, agreements that go back decades. If I tried to leave completely, there would be a war. People would die. Innocent people. And what about us? She gestured between them. What about our baby? Detective Park said the Jade Dragons know about me. She said I'm in danger. Minjun's expression hardened into something dangerous. If they touch you, if they even think about touching you or our child, I will burn their entire organization to the ground. The words should have frightened her, the cold certainty in his voice, the promise of violence. But instead, she felt something shift inside her chest. Because underneath the threat, she heard what he was really saying. He would protect her. He would protect their child, no matter what it cost him. I don't want you to start a war for me, she whispered. I just want the truth. All of it. No more secrets, no more carefully managed revelations. If we're going to do this, if we're going to try to build something together, I need to know everything. Minjun moved to her couch and sank onto it, his head in his hands. And when he looked up at her, she saw a vulnerability there that took her breath away. My father was the head of the Seoul Syndicate's New York operations, he began. They started as a protection organization for Korean immigrants in the 80s, but they grew into something bigger. Smuggling, gambling, eventually moving into pharmaceuticals and medical supplies. He paused, gathering his thoughts. When I was 19, a rival organization called the Jade Dragons tried to take over our territory. My father refused to back down, so they killed him and my mother as a message. I'm so sorry, Amara said softly, sitting down beside him but not quite touching him. The organization wanted me to take over immediately, to show strength. But I made them a deal. I would lead, but we would transition into legitimate business. It took years. Some of the older members resisted. Some left. A few. He paused, his jaw tightening. Had to be removed. Removed? The word felt heavy with implications she didn't want to examine too closely. I'm not a good man, Amara. Minjun turned to look at her, his eyes dark with memories she couldn't see. I've done things I'm not proud of. Things that keep me awake at night. Things I can never take back. But you're trying to change? She said, and it wasn't quite a question. I've been trying for 20 years. Sterling Pharmaceuticals is legitimate. Most of our operations are clean now, but there are still connections, still obligations to the old organization, and there are still people who would love to see me fall. Like the Jade Dragons. Like the Jade Dragons, he confirmed. They've been testing our defenses for months. Small provocations, territorial disputes. But if they know about you, about the baby... He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. That changes everything. Detective Park said she could put me in protective custody. Min-jun whirled around, his expression fierce. Absolutely not. I don't trust the NYPD to keep you safe. They have leaks, informants who work for the organizations they're supposed to be investigating. You'd be more vulnerable in their custody than you are with me. Then what do you suggest? Amara asked, standing to face him. Because I can't just pretend this isn't happening. I can't go to work every day and act like my life isn't in danger. You're not going back to Sterling, Min-jun said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Not until this situation is resolved. You can't just order me to quit my job. I can, when your job is putting you and our child at risk. He moved toward her, his hands coming up to cradle her face. Amara, please. I know you value your independence. I know you hate being told what to do. But this is different. This is life and death. She wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she could take care of herself. But looking into his eyes, seeing the genuine terror there, she understood something crucial. This wasn't about control or power. This was about a man who'd already lost everyone he loved, facing the possibility of losing her too. What do you need me to do? She asked quietly. The relief that flooded his features was palpable. I have a safe house. Completely secure, off the grid. I need you to stay there until I can neutralize the threat from the Jade Dragons. Neutralize? The word sounded ominous. I'm going to end this, Min-jun said, his voice hard with determination. I'm going to make it clear to every organization in New York that you and our child are off limits, that anyone who even thinks about touching you will face consequences they can't imagine. How? Please subscribe to Kiana's Love Story, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Now, let's continue. Min-jun was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decisions that would change everything. By doing what I should have done years ago. By walking away completely. By dismantling my father's empire piece by piece until there's nothing left but Sterling Pharmaceuticals and a legitimate business that no one can threaten. Amara stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. You would do that? Give up everything you built? I told you before, he said, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones with infinite tenderness. I built it because I had nothing else to live for. But now I have you. I have our child. I have the possibility of a life that isn't built on my father's blood and mistakes. But you said walking away would start a war? It might, he admitted. But staying will definitely start one. The Jade Dragons know about you now. Other organizations will find out. And they'll all see you as my weakness, as leverage they can use against me. His expression hardened with resolve. The only way to protect you is to remove the target. To make it clear that I'm out. That there's nothing to be gained by coming after me or mine. That's incredibly dangerous, Amara said, fear clawing at her chest. Less dangerous than the alternative. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. I won't let them hurt you, Amara. I won't let my past destroy our future. She buried her face against his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. This was insane. All of it. She was standing in her apartment planning to go into hiding while the father of her child dismantled a criminal empire. It was the kind of situation that should send her running as far and as fast as possible. But instead, she found herself holding him tighter. When do we leave? She asked. Tonight. As soon as you can pack a bag. She pulled back to look at him. Just like that? I'm supposed to disappear? Just for a little while? His expression was gentle but firm. A few weeks, maybe a month. Just until I can make this right. And work? My apartment? My life? I'll handle Sterling. You can work remotely on non-sensitive projects if you want to stay busy. Your apartment will be secure. And your life? He paused, his dark eyes searching hers. Your life will be waiting for you when this is over. I promise. Amara thought about Detective Park's offer of protective custody. She thought about the surveillance photos, about the world of violence and danger that Min-jun inhabited. She thought about how much easier it would be to just walk away, to let the police protect her, to raise this child alone and safe. But she also thought about the man standing in front of her. Not the crime boss, not the CEO, but the man who'd held her through the night in Chicago. The man who'd looked at their baby's ultrasound with tears in his eyes. The man who was offering to give up everything he'd spent 20 years building just to keep her safe. Okay, she said finally. I'll go to the safe house. But Min-jun, when this is over, when you've done whatever you need to do, I want the whole truth. Every detail. No more secrets. No more secrets, he agreed. I promise. They spent the next hour packing clothes, toiletries, the prenatal vitamins the doctor had prescribed. Amara moved through her apartment like she was in a dream, grabbing books and laptop and the ultrasound photos from her refrigerator. This was real. This was actually happening. So she was going into hiding because she'd fallen in love with a man whose life was built on danger and deception. Min-jun made phone calls while she packed, his voice low and commanding as he issued instructions in Korean. She caught enough words to understand that he was mobilizing his security team, arranging protection details, setting contingencies in place. When they finally left her apartment, it was nearly midnight. Min-jun's car was waiting downstairs, but this wasn't the sleek sedan she'd ridden in before. This was an armored SUV with tinted windows and a driver who carried himself like military or private security. This is Park Jin-ho, Min-jun introduced as they climbed into the back seat. He's been with me for 15 years. You can trust him with your life. Jin-ho nodded at her in the rearview mirror, his expression serious but not unkind. Miss Collins, I'll keep you safe. The drive took them out of Manhattan, through Brooklyn, and into parts of Long Island Amara had never seen. They drove for over an hour before finally pulling up to a modern house set back from the road, surrounded by trees and high walls. This is it, Min-jun said as they got out. Completely secure, state-of-the-art security system. Safe room in the basement if anything goes wrong. Jin-ho and 2 other guards will be on rotation 24/7. The house was beautiful, Amara realized as they went inside. Spacious and bright with comfortable furniture and fully stocked kitchen. It was the kind of place someone could actually live, not just hide. The master bedroom is upstairs, Min-jun said, carrying her bags. There's an office if you want to work. A library, and the kitchen has everything you should need. If there's anything you want, anything at all, just tell Jin-ho and he'll arrange it. Amara wandered through the space, touching the furniture, looking out windows that showed only trees and darkness. This was going to be her home for the foreseeable future. Her prison, however gilded. Will you stay? She asked, turning to find Min-jun watching her from the doorway. Tonight, he said. But tomorrow I have to go back. I have meetings, arrangements to make, the process of dismantling the organization. He trailed off, running a hand through his hair. It's going to take time. I don't want you to leave. The admission came out smaller than she'd intended, more vulnerable. Min-jun closed the distance between them in 3 strides, pulling her into his arms. I don't want to leave either. But the sooner I start this, the sooner it's over. The sooner we can actually build the life we want. That night, they lay in the unfamiliar bed, wrapped around each other. Min-jun's hand rested on her stomach, where their child was growing, barely visible but undeniably present. I love you, he whispered into the darkness. I know I have no right to ask you to wait for me, to trust me after everything you've learned. But I love you, Amara. You and this baby. You're my future. My only future. I love you too, she whispered back, the words both a promise and a prayer. Just come back to me. Whatever you have to do, However long it takes. Come back to me. Always. He promised. Always. The next morning, she woke to find him already dressed, standing at the window watching the sunrise. She knew without asking that it was time for him to go. Be careful, she said, moving to stand beside him. Always am. He kissed her, soft and lingering, like he was trying to memorize the feel of her lips against his. I'll call you every day, and Jinho has instructions to bring you anything you need. I don't need anything, she said. Except you. You have me, he said fiercely. You'll always have me. She watched from the window as his car pulled away, disappearing down the long driveway into the morning mist. And then, she was alone, pregnant and in hiding, waiting for the man she loved to dismantle his entire world so they could build a new one together. The days that followed blurred together in a strange routine. Amara worked remotely on strategic projects for Sterling, though Jessica had been told she was taking medical leave. She read books, played the piano that sat in the library, and tried not to think about what Min Jun was doing back in the city. True to his word, he called every day, sometimes for hours, talking about everything and nothing. Other times, just for a few minutes, his voice tight with stress, letting her know he was alive and thinking of her. How did the meeting go? She asked one evening, 2 weeks into her exile. As well as could be expected, Minjun replied, and she could hear the exhaustion in his voice. I'm making progress. Slowly. Some of the old guard are resistant, but they're coming around. And the Jade Dragons? Quiet. Too quiet. His voice hardened. I don't trust it. Maybe they're backing off, Amara suggested hopefully. Maybe. Or maybe they're planning something bigger. He sighed. How are you feeling? How's the baby? We're fine. I had the follow-up appointment with Dr. Rodriguez yesterday. Jinho drove me. Everything looks good. I wish I could have been there. Next one, she promised. When this is all over. When this is all over, he repeated. That's becoming my mantra. When this is all over, we'll get married. When this is all over, we'll tell the world about the baby. When this is all over, we'll actually get to live the life we want. Soon, Amara said, willing it to be true. It has to be soon. But the universe had other plans. 3 days later, on a cold October evening, everything went wrong. Amara was making dinner, moving around the kitchen with a domesticity that felt strange but pleasant, even when all the lights in the house suddenly went out. She froze, her heart immediately racing. The backup generator should have kicked in automatically. The fact that it hadn't meant someone had deliberately disabled it. Jinho, she called out, her voice shaking. No response. Moving carefully in the darkness, Amara made her way toward the safe room Minjun had shown her. But before she could reach it, she heard the sound of breaking glass from the back of the house. They were inside. She ran then, abandoning stealth for speed, racing toward the safe room door. But strong hands caught her from behind, pulling her back against a hard chest. A cloth pressed over her mouth and nose, sweet and chemical. The last thing she thought before darkness claimed her was Minjun's face. His promise to protect her. His voice saying, always. Then nothing. When Amara woke, everything was wrong. The room was dark and cold, nothing like the safe house. Her head throbbed, and her hands were bound behind her back. She was sitting in a chair, and as her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she realized she wasn't alone. A man sat across from her, middle-aged and well-dressed, with cold eyes that reminded her of a snake. Miss Collins, he said in accented English. Welcome. I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but your companion made it quite difficult to arrange a meeting any other way. Who are you? Her voice came out hoarse. My name is Chen Wei. I represent the Jade Dragon organization. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. And you, my dear, are going to help me send a message to Kang Min-jun. Terror flooded through her, but she forced her voice to stay steady. He'll kill you for this. Perhaps, Chen Wei agreed pleasantly, but first, he's going to give me what I want. Territory, operations, and his complete withdrawal from our businesses. In exchange, I'll return you and your unborn child unharmed. And if he refuses? The smile widened. Then we'll find out just how much Kang Min-jun is willing to lose for love. Amara's mind raced. Min-jun had been so careful, had taken every precaution. How had they found her? How had they gotten past his security? As if reading her thoughts, Chen Wei said, "Your guard Jin Ho sends his regards. Impressive how much loyalty $10 million can buy." Betrayal. Jin Ho, who Min-jun had trusted for 15 years, had sold them out. "What do you want from me?" Amara asked, trying to buy time, trying to think. "Just your cooperation. We'll be sending Mr. Kang a video shortly, letting him know the terms of your release. I suggest you look appropriately frightened." And despite her best efforts to stay strong, to not give them the satisfaction, Amara felt tears slip down her cheeks. Not for herself, but for Min-jun. Because she knew what he would do. She knew he would give them anything they wanted to get her back. He would sacrifice everything he'd been trying to build. All his plans for legitimacy, all his hopes for their future. He would give up his empire, his power, everything that had defined his adult life. All for her. The question was whether she would let him. Somewhere in the darkness, bound and terrified but not broken, Amara Collins began to plan. Because she hadn't survived foster care, poverty, keen and her own determination to be anyone's leverage. And if the Jade Dragons thought she would sit quietly while they destroyed the man she loved, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The video they forced her to record would reach Min-jun within the hour. His response would determine everything. But Amara was done being protected. Done being sheltered from Min-jun's dangerous world. If this was the life she was choosing, if this was the man she was choosing to love, then it was time she stopped being a victim and became a fighter. Just like him. The war was coming. And this time, they would face it together.